thinking actually change your brain, or does it just feel that way? Here is the direct answer. Yes, it does, and not through some vague mood mechanism, through the exact same process that lets you get better at anything else you repeat. That should worry you a little, and it should give you the fix as well. I am Sahar Andrade, a physician by training, non practitioner, neuro leadership coach. Quick note before we start, same as always, everything here is my experience and my opinion as a coach, not a diagnosis, not a fact about you. You decide what fits. This is the Friday Forbes article like edition. Shorter, more practical, built like an article you have read, not a deep dive. Today's question came straight out of what people are actually typing into search bars. Does negative thinking affect the brain? The direct answer is yes. Here is the mechanism, and here is what to do about it in the next 5 minutes. Let's talk about the crisis. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change based on repeated activity. Repeated activation strengthens the neural connections behind it. Over roughly 6 weeks of consistent repetition, new pathways form and get easier to access. This is genuinely good news most of the time. It's how you got better at your job, how you learn to read a room, how a skill that used to take conscious effort now runs on autopilot. The problem is neuroplasticity doesn't check whether the pattern being repeated is useful. It threatens whatever gets repeated, including a thought. If a leader runs the same negative loop over time, every time, something goes wrong. A sentence like, this is going to fail like the last one. That loop isn't just an unpleasant mood, and it's not just self prophecy. It's a pathway getting rehearsed the same way a golf swing or a sales pitch get rehearsed. The more it fires, the easier it fires. And the faster the brain reaches for it next time something goes wrong. Often before there is even real evidence, the situation warrants it. I worked with a director last year who described it perfectly without knowing the mechanism behind it. She said every setback, big or small, funneled into the exact same two words in her head within seconds. Of course, a dropped call, a missed number, a hard piece of feedback, same two words every time, faster each time. That's a pathway that had been rehearsed for years, firing on schedule. For a lot of leaders right now, this loop has a very specific, very current trigger: AI, artificial intelligence. A new tool rolls out, a mandate arrives to move faster than the team feels ready for, and the same rehearsed line fires. I am going to fall behind. Everyone else already gets this. That's not a verdict on anyone's technical ability. That's a well worn pathway meeting a fast moving and familiar trigger. And AI is currently generating more of those triggers more often than almost anything else in a leader's week. There is a physical way to picture this, and it makes the mechanism less abstract. Think of the brain's pathways like trails through a field. The first time a thought fires, it's like walking through tall grass. Slow, effortful, resistance the whole way. Each repeat presses the grass down a little more. After enough repeats, the trail is worn smooth and the feet find it automatically faster than any other route across the same field. A negative thought that's fired daily for 10 years isn't a stubborn habit. It's the smoothest trail in the entire field. And the brain under pressure always takes the smoothest trail first. Why? Because the first function of the brain is protection, and the second function of the brain is efficiency. Here is what makes this specifically dangerous for leaders. The higher the stakes, the faster the brain reaches for whatever pathway is most rehearsed, not whatever pathway is most accurate. Under real pressure, there is no time to reason from scratch. The brain grabs the nearest well-worn groove. If that groove says this always goes wrong, that's the story that shows up in the boardroom. Not because it's true, but because it's fast. And under threat, fast wins over accurate almost every single time. This matters more for leaders than almost anyone else in an organization because a leader's rehearsed pathway doesn't stay contained to their own head. It gets spoken out loud in meetings, in one on ones, in the tone of a single email, dozens of times a week. A leader with a well worn negative trail isn't just experiencing it privately, they are broadcasting it in small doses to everyone who reports to them constantly, whether they intend it or not. This is also why willpower alone rarely fixes it. Telling yourself to just think positive, and I hear that a lot. Oh, just think positive. And people, it's funny that even gurus of wellness and affirmations are just think positive, but they never tell you how to do it. They never show you the way. It's like, if you were able to do it, couldn't you have done it already? I digress. Telling yourself to just think positive doesn't compete with a pathway that's had years of repetition. It's not a contest of intention. It's a contest of which route is more worn. Let's talk about the cost of that. What this actually costs a leader in practice? Three things, and they compound. First, decision speed under pressure gets hijacked by the most rehearsed story, not the most accurate one. A leader whose default loop runs towards catastrophe will read ambiguous situations as worse than they are, more often than not, simply because that's the fastest interpretation that is available. I call that catastrophize. Can I say that? Catastrophizing everything. That's what I call it. Second, it's contagious in a very practical sense. Leaders set the interpretive frame for a room. A leader who reflexively narrates, of course this failed, teaches a team without ever meaning to that setbacks are catastrophic rather than ordinary. Teams learn what to expect from leadership by watching the pattern, not the policy. I think of an operations director who told me his team had started translating his real words before repeating them back in planning meetings. He had said something like, "This quarter is going to be difficult." And by the time it reached the front line, it had become leadership thinks we're failing. It reminds me of a game that we used to play when we were kids. It was called, it's a French word, it was called téléphone cassé. Téléphone cassé means like the broken phone. And what it means, like we would sit in a circle and we would whisper a word for the first person. And by the time the 10th person hears it, it's something totally, totally different. Totally. So that's exactly the same thing. Nobody was lying. His team has learned correctly that his default framing skewed towards the worst version of events. And they had started compensating for it without ever naming what they were doing. The cost wasn't one bad meeting. It was a slow erosion of how much weight his actual words carried by the time they reached the people who needed them most. This particular version of the loop had real numbers behind it. Deloitte's 2026 Global Human Capital Trends report found 60% of executives already use AI in decision making. Only 5% say they manage it well. That gap Using something daily while feeling unable to manage it well is exactly the kind of ambiguity a rehearsed negative loop fills in fastest, usually with the worst case interpretation, whether or not it's accurate. Third, and this is the one that surprises people, the loop gets more efficient over time, not less, if nothing interrupts it. That's the nature of a threatened pathway. Left alone, this doesn't level off. It gets faster and more automatic, which is exactly why leaders often report the pattern feeling heavier the longer their career goes. When what's actually happening is the groove has simply had more years to live. There is a version of this that shows up specifically in high performance, and it's worth naming directly. The same repetition that builds a negative loop can build an excellent one. A leader who has spent years rehearsing, what did I do well here? What's the next right step? Has built that pathway just as strong as anyone's catastrophic one. The mechanism doesn't care which direction it's pointed, it only cares about repetition. That's actually the most useful part of this whole conversation, and it's where the fix actually lives. What's the solution? If the mechanism is repetition, the fix is also repetition, just pointed somewhere else on purpose. This is not about forcing positivity, like think positive, right? And it isn't about pretending any problem isn't real. It's about catching the automatic loop the moment it fires and consciously running a more accurate one in its place on purpose, especially on the low stakes moments where it's easiest to practice. The goal isn't to never think, of course, this happened. The goal is to notice it fast and have a rehearsed, accurate alternative ready before the automatic one runs the whole meeting. This is the same territory as my brain framework, catching a pattern while it's firing instead of only recognizing it after, once it's ready, shape the decision. The accurate alternative doesn't need to be inflated, it just needs to be true and specific. Not everything is fine when the brain won't buy anyway. Something closer to this is one data point. Here is what I actually know. Here is the next concrete step. Said enough times in enough small moments, that sentence starts to compete with the old one, not replace it overnight, compete with it. And over weeks, win more often. In practice, this looks smaller than people expect. It's not a journaling practice or a mindset overhaul or sitting on the floor meditating for 3 hours. It's not that. It's catching the two-word reflex of course in the 10 seconds after it fires and replacing it with one specific true sentence about what actually happened. Not 5 sentences. One, the brain doesn't need a speech to start building a new trail. It needs the same short route walked again and again and again until the new one is just as smooth as the old one. The 6 week window matters here. Neuroplasticity research consistently points to roughly 6 weeks of consistent repetition before a new pathway becomes generally easier to access than the old one. That's not a discouraging number. That's a specific buildable target. 6 weeks of catching it and redirecting it on purpose in the moment that matter least. So it's available in the moments that matter most. This is worth naming directly for anyone whose loop gets triggered by AI specifically. The 6 week rebuild works exactly the same way here. The goal is not forcing confidence about a tool that's still new. It's catching the automatic I'm behind loop within seconds and replacing it with something true and specific. What you actually know, what you are actually learning, what the next concrete step is. One, what you actually know. as real data, not thinking about it, not imagining it, not perceiving it, not what someone else saying. What concrete information you have, what you actually know, what you are actually learning your own way. What's the next concrete step for you to do? Repeated consistently, that competes with the old loop the same way it does with any other trigger. A simple way to start: pick one recurring stressor, a specific type of meeting, a specific kind of message, and track for 1 week how often the automatic loop fires before you have even finished reading or hearing the trigger. Most leaders are surprised by the number, and it's rarely 1 or 2 times a day. It's closer to a dozen, most of them so brief they were never noticed as a thought at all, just felt as a mood. That week of tracking alone starts to interrupt the automaticity, because noticing a pattern is the first step in walking a different trail instead of the old one. They say, once you know what you have, that's halfway to the solution. Like we say, once you know what's going on, you already know what to look for as a solution. If you don't, you will never have a solution for it. You don't know what you don't know, right? I want to be honest about the timeline, because vague promises don't hold up under real pressure. This is not a one conversation fix. It's a rehearsal practice, the same as anything else a leader trains, like public speaking, like negotiation, like reading a balance sheet. Nobody expects those to be automatic after one attempt. The negative loop got years of practice. The new one needs weeks, not years. And it doesn't need consistency, not intensity. A few seconds of redirection caught early, repeated often, beats one long, effortful attempt to think positive during the worst meeting of the quarter. You might be thinking, I don't have time to rehearse my thoughts. I have a business to run, a department to run, an organization to manage. Fair. But the rehearsal is already happening every single time the old loop fires, uninterrupted. You're not choosing between rehearsing and not rehearsing. You are choosing which pathway gets the repetition. The one that reaches for catastrophe by default, or the one that reaches for the next accurate step. Again, we need to remember that the brain default is negativity. The brain default is negativity. The first one is running for free, whether you intend it or not, which is the negative one. The second one takes maybe 10 seconds of attention, caught early, and it's the version that actually serves the decision you are about to make. There is a second objection I hear often. It's just who I am. I've always been the person who expects the worst. This way, I don't fool myself, or something along those lines. That framing treats the pattern as fixed identity instead of what it actually is. A trail that got worn through repetition, which means it can be reshaped through repetition too. Nobody is arguing you should become someone else. The argument is narrower and more useful than that. The trail you have walked the most isn't necessarily the trail that serves you best. And it's not permanent, just because it's old. I have seen leaders push back on this exact point and then notice, once they actually start catching it, how many times a day the old loop fires without them even choosing it. That's noticing alone changes the ratio. You can't redirect a pattern you're not tracking. The tracking is the first 10 seconds. The redirection is the next 10, 20 seconds. That's all you need. 20 seconds. A handful of times a day against years of automatic repetition sounds small. Over 6 weeks, it's not. So if this is a pattern you recognize in yourself or in someone on your team, the place I had point you is the pressure. It's a free live 45-minute session I run once a month. And this past Thursday, yesterday, July 30th, we covered the first model in the 2026 series, the thermostat versus thermometer. The difference between reacting to pressure and setting the tone in the room regardless of it. The model applies directly to the pattern we just walked through, noticing the reflex before it runs through, and choosing the response on purpose instead of by default. If negative loops are a pattern you or someone in your team lives inside, it's exactly the kind of thing worth 45 minutes of your Thursday. If you missed it, the recording is available. And the next live session is Thursday, August 27th, 2026 at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Same format. One model taught in full, one tool practiced live, 45 minutes free. And you can register at saharandrade.com/pressure-room. Link is in the show notes. If you want to have the recording of the last one, send me a comment, email me at sahar@saharconsulting.com or comment here and I'll be happy to send you the recording. As I always say, leadership doesn't fail. Nervous systems do. Before I leave, I always say show me some love. Subscribe, comment, rate, share our podcast. Thank you for your support and making us one of the top 2% global podcasts. It's a small production, very small production. So I so appreciate your support. Please share it so I can reach more people that might need this advice. Till I see you again next Wednesday or our normal long episode of AI Cafe Conversations podcast, the only podcast that talks about AI, leadership, and neuroscience. We cover anything neuroscience of pressure. We cover everything leadership under pressure. Till we meet again, peace out.
1,